Hey guys, alright, today we're going to be watching another video from Overly Sarcastic Productions, this time Classics Summarized Beowulf. Now this is a old Germanic anglo-saxon legend of a warrior king? Was he a king? Was Beowulf a king? I can't remember. It has been so long since I've read it. How many years? Oh god. It's been 5 years. No, 6. One of those. It's been one of those. 5 or 6, I think. And yeah, I didn't like it when I first read it, but as I've gotten older, and obviously I haven't read it, but I've gotten, and especially since I've become more of an Anglo-Saxon historian, whereas when I first read it, this was not what I was looking to be. um, so I've gotten a greater appreciation for the story itself over time. But let's go ahead and learn the story.
Beowulf was written a little over 1,000 years ago, and it's one of the oldest English texts that still exist.
Okay,
and that's
yes, English.
English
Anglo-Saxon.
with big glowing air quotes, by the way, as it was written in Old English. Now, you might have Old English confused for that stuff Shakespeare wrote, you know, all those forsooths
That's Middle
and
English.
verilies and whatnot, but that's actually early modern English.
Oh,
now,
early
failing
modern.
that, you might think...
Yes, the term English, though, is such a... From my understanding, I believe it is a Angles and Saxons. That's where English come from. Mainly the Angles, I believe. Before, they were just Britons. They were Celts. So their language before the Anglo-Saxons arrived would have been Celtic, kind of similar to what Irish sounds like, or Welsh. Probably, or Pictish, old Scottish. Ancient Scottish language. But yeah, Old English, Germanic.
Think that messy language Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales in must be Old English. You know, that stuff you can kind of read, but it's all written with weird spellings and pronounced like you've got a golf ball in each cheek. Well, I'm afraid that's only Middle English. No,
Okay,
if you
that
want to know
one's
what
Middle
real
English,
Old
yeah.
English was like, look no further than... Oh, good lord, where do you start?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you understand German, you can pick apart Old English far better than maybe if you speak English, I think. Just because I think with the development of the languages, I think modern German is probably a little bit closer related to Anglo-Saxon than modern English is, because modern English has the influence of the Romantic languages, French, most obviously because of the Normans coming in and conquering England with William the Conqueror, so that of course screwed up the language progression. But yeah.
Alright, one thing to note about Beowulf is that once you boil it down to its essential textual components, it's actually a remarkably short story, especially by epic poetry standards. This is because the style of writing at the time involved what amounted to drive-by exposition, where the narrator would, at random intervals, veer the story off course into a random tangent and explain huge, complex historical concepts.
The history of Denmark as a unified kingdom first began in the 10th century, but historic documents describe the geographic area and the people living there, the Danes, as early as 500 AD. These early documents include the writings of Jordanes and Procopius. With the Christianization of the Danes in circa 960 AD, it is clear that there existed a kingship in Scandinavia which controlled roughly the current Danish territory. Queen Margaret II can trace her lineage back to the Viking kings Gorm the Old and Harald Bluetooth, from this time thus making the monarchy of Denmark the oldest in Europe. The area we now know as Denmark has a rich prehistory, having been populated by several prehistoric cultures and people for about 12,000 years, since the end of the last ice age. Denmark's history has particularly been influenced by its geographical location between the North and Baltic Seas. This meant that it was between Sweden and Germany, and thus at the center of the mutual struggle for control of the Baltic Sea. Dominium Maris Baltici. I fucked that up. Denmark was long in disputes with Sweden over control of Skånelanden. Skånelanden. Fuck, I can't speak Swedish, Danish. Of Schleswig, a Danish fief, and Holstein.
Context to provide
German
backstory for...
Oh my god, there's more. Hold up, we gotta read it. We're gonna keep reading.
Historical context to provide backstory.
All right, there we go. Eventually, Denmark lost the conflicts and ended up ceding first Skanderland to Sweden and later Schleswig-Holstein to the German Empire. After their eventual secession of Norway in 1814, Denmark retained control of the old Norwegian colonies of the Faroe Islands, Greenland, and Iceland. During the 20th century, Iceland gained independence. Greenland and the Faroes became integral parts of the Kingdom of Denmark, and North Schleswig reunited with Denmark in 1920 after a referendum. During World War II, Denmark was occupied by Nazi Germany, but was eventually liberated by British forces of the Allies in 1945, after which it joined the United Nations. In the aftermath of World War II and with the emergence of the subsequent Cold War, Denmark was quick to join the military alliance of NATO as a founding member in 1949.
Story for everything from a line of great kings to a small pile of gold. So when you cut out all that nonsense, you're left with a nice, simple story about how one man beat the crap out of 3 giant monsters, became the king of a small country, and inspired all the coolest parts of both JRR Tolkien and Skyrim. This is good for...
Yeah, that's 100% accurate, yeah. Tolkien was definitely inspired by Beowulf. That's just a no-brainer. Because, like, obviously the Rohirrim, the Rohan, the people of Rohan are quite obviously anglo-saxon. And then, what else? And yeah, the plot of the story is essentially Beowulf, some dude going up and beating up some monsters.
For me, because
Summarized.
in case
Bam.
you haven't
Done.
noticed, I love to talk. And in between the simplicity of the story and the shortness of the text, there is plenty of time for me to ramble on about the idiosyncrasies of Beowulf without exceeding my arbitrary time limit. For instance, did you know Beowulf literally means bee-wolf, which itself was a colloquialism translating to bee hunter, which in turn just meant bear? Well, you do now. So our story begins with some backstory. Yeah, I know what I said, but this part is actually pretty cool, so roll with it. Once upon a time in ancient Denmark, there was a great king named Shield Shaving. He doesn't appear in this book, but Shield had a mighty son, Beowulf, who became an equally mighty king when Shield died. However, despite the name, this was a different Beowulf, who also does not appear in this book. Beowulf, still not that one, in turn had a son, Halfdana, who sparked a long-standing feud between his family and the Heathbards by getting himself killed by Froda, an ancient Danish king and lord of the Heathbards who also might have been his brother. And none of this appears in the book either. Isn't this fun? But Halfdana managed to have 4 kids before he died, although one of their names has been lost. The 3 kids we know about were Hrothgar, Halga, and Hrothgar. No relation. Now, among these kids, Hrothgar actually does appear in our story. Basically, he won some big war and got himself crowned king as a result, and decided to use his newfound wealth and power to build himself the ultimate party venue, a huge mead hall he named Heorot. There he and his thanes spent their days partying up a storm, and it is here that our story truly begins. But hey now, I hear you cry. I thought this story was supposed to be about Beowulf. I mean, it's his name on the cover. Apart from that fake-out guy with the same name 2 generations back, we haven't heard a thing about this Beowulf guy. What gives? Well, geez, you're pretty impatient, aren't you? I get your hopes up by telling you this story's gonna be short and this is how you behave? Shame on you. Besides, I wasn't finished. See, this story happened a long time ago, in that magical, poorly defined time period in which it was widely accepted that ghoulies, ghosties, and long-leggedy beasties of all ages were just sort of roaming around causing trouble. And in Hrothgar's neck of the woods, the nastiest of these monsters was an ugly piece of work named Grendel. Grendel, we learn, is a big ugly giant descended from the original bad guy, the biblical Cain, and he lives in a grody swamp near a lake full of monsters, called, aptly enough, the Lake of Monsters. But the construction of this new mead hall starts disturbing his natural habitat, largely because the sounds of the 24-hour party circuit happening 10 feet from his house cause him to become just a touch crankier than usual. Now, Grendel has a Grinch complex.
Whatever the reason, his heart or his pains, he stood there that evening just hating the Danes, staring out from his swamp with a sour Grendel frown at the warm lights of Heorot away by the town. For he knew every Dane down in Denmark was there, getting so blackout drunk they forgot how to care.
The size of East Texas, and when he hears the near-constant partying coming from Heorot, he gets a doozy of an idea of the terrible, awful variety. After all, the easiest way to stop the party is to kill everyone partying.
Yeah.
Well, you gotta give him points for efficiency. So that night, Grendel scoots on over to the mead hall, busts down the door, kills 30 of the thanes, and skedaddles back on home. This violent party crashing becomes something of a nightly trend, which is disturbing for a variety of reasons, not the least of which being the fact that a rampaging hellbeast murdering a bunch of their friends didn't kill the party atmosphere the first time it happened. But we must not forget.
Hey man, party don't stop. You keep partying until you die. It's just how it happens Grendel will speed that along, but you don't stop partying.
That these fine fellows were Nords, one of the most famously testosterone-poisoned cultures in all of human history, so it should come as no surprise that it takes several more late-night murder trips from Grendel before Hrothgar considers calling on their buddies, the Yates, for a little bit of help. Either he got tired of losing his thanes, or he got tired of replacing that stupid door every day. Either way, it's time to call in the cavalry. Enter the Storm Yates, led by Beowulf! See, I told you we'd get here. So Beowulf, right? This guy is just the coolest.
He's a
Hrothgar has
Chad.
known him since he was a kid, and since then, Beowulf has made something of a name for himself doing some monster slaying. So Hrothgar asks what Beowulf's plan for dealing with Grendel is, and Beowulf is all like, well, you know, I've been thinking. Grendel's not really a warrior, because he doesn't use weapons, right? Well, I think it's only fair if when we fight, I don't use any weapons either. And everyone's like,
Mad lad.
that's a great idea! But an impending fistfight with a terrifying murderous giant is no reason not to party. Actually, in Nordic cultures, it was specifically a reason to party. So they get down with their bad selves in the Heorot for a while, but one of the warriors is doubtful of Beowulf's abilities. So this guy, Unferth, is like, hey Beowulf, I heard you lost a week-long swimming contest to your buddy Brekka. Now how am I supposed to expect a loser like you to beat Grendel? And Beowulf is like, I'm afraid it's true. After swimming for a solid week in full plate armor, I'm afraid I can't say that I beat Brekka. But in my defense, I was slightly slowed down by the 9 sea monsters I killed along the way! Ooh! So night falls and Beowulf prepares himself for the upcoming battle by dumping all of his armor and weapons and waiting in the Heorot for Grendel to come a-stomping by. And soon enough, Grendel busts down the door and encounters Beowulf. So they beat the ever-loving crap out of each other for a while and tear up the Heorot like crazy, and Beowulf wins by ripping off Grendel's arm with his bare hands. Ha! He's been disarmed. So Grendel flips
Give me a moment to process that pun.
out and runs back to the lake to bleed out in peace. Beowulf gives Grendel's arm to Hrothgar to hang from the Heorot's rafters, and having completed the Kill Grendel quest, King Hrothgar showers Beowulf with rewards, gives him access to his halls and gear, and probably also lets him buy a house in Whiterun. Unferth, that guy from earlier, apologizes for doubting Beowulf's abilities and gives him an heirloom sword named Hrunting as an apology present. They all start fixing up the Heorot, then use their newly repaired mead hall to get blackout drunk. Life is good. Until Grendel's mother storms into the hall, murders Hrothgar's trusted advisor, grabs Grendel's arm, and vanishes into the night. So Hrothgar sends Beowulf to track down Grendel's mother and avenge the murdered Thane, Ashera for those of you who care, and Beowulf starts hunting her down. They track her through a variety of cartoonishly evil locations and end up at the Lake of Monsters, where they find Ashera's head along with a veritable menagerie of sea monsters. Beowulf prepares for battle by putting on his heavy armor and cannonballing into the lake to confront Grendel's mother, who lives at the bottom. For those of you concerned with his well-being, don't worry too much. Beowulf's lungs are the size of train cars, and the solid day it takes for him to hit lake bottom does little more than bore him. But his boredom is soon over, since as soon as he gets close to the bottom, Grendel's mother ambushes him and drags him into her cave, which is actually a pretty nice locale. Anyway, they do glorious battle. Grendel's mother ambushes him and drags him into her cave, which is
the property values down here are great. Nice place. Nice.
Actually a pretty nice locale. Anyway, they do glorious battle, but Beowulf's sword Hrunting utterly fails to hurt her in any way, so he resorts to his tried and true method of using sick nasty wrestling maneuvers. Unfortunately, Grendel's mother finds this effort utterly unimpressive and just starts trying to stab him a whole bunch. But luckily for Beowulf, Grendel's mother has a bit of a hoarding problem, and her cave is absolutely full of nifty magical weaponry. So he grabs a shiny looking sword that turns out to be super magical and manages to kill her with it. Then, after some searching, he finds Grendel's corpse and decapitates it to bring his head back as a present for Hrothgar. Funny story about that. As it turns out, both Grendel and Grendel's mother were totally immune to mortal weapons, but that sword Beowulf grabbed had been forged by giants and was thus capable of hurting them. Why Grendel's mother kept the one thing capable of killing her within arm's reach is probably the subject of much scholarly debate. Unfortunately, this kick-ass magical sword appears to have been one use only, since after Beowulf uses it to decapitate Grendel, the blade straight up dissolves. So Beowulf swims back to the surface with Grendel's head and the sword's hilt, both of which he gives to Hrothgar. He's showered with gifts again, partying happens, etc., etc. Then, Beowulf and the Yeats, having done all the monster slaying they felt obligated to do, sail back to their homeland, where Beowulf presents their king Higelac with a bunch of treasure and is lauded as a great hero. As thanks, King Higelac gives him a fancy sword, a bunch of land, and a really nice house. My god, this is Skyrim. But before we go any farther, let's talk about that one-use-only sword, because it's actually really interesting. So first of all, the hilt is carved with vaguely biblical scenes about how the giants were wiped out by the Great Flood in an effort by God to wipe out all evil. The hilt is also covered in Norse runes, implied to be some kind of magic, which is interesting because traditionally pagan magic and Christianity didn't exactly get along. And the other cool thing about this sword is that it was described as Damascened, that is, having been put through the process to create Damascus steel. Now, for those of you who don't know, Damascus steel is a legendarily tough metal whose forging process has been lost, which has endlessly frustrated modern metallurgists since there are a ton of Damascus steel blades lying around, and you'd think we'd be able to reverse engineer something. But no, every time we try, we just keep finding weirder and weirder things about Damascus steel that makes us want to know how to make it even more. For instance, not only do the blades look super cool and magic, kind of like liquid metal, they've actually been shown to contain carbon nanotubes. Carbon goddamn nanotubes. How does that even happen? But anyway, back to Beowulf.
I'm not a swordsman, so I have no idea how swords really, the making of swords and the process So it just confuses me.
So King Higelac and his next of kin go the way of all badasses, and Beowulf finds himself crowned king of the Yates, who he manages to rule without incident for a solid 50 years. That is, until some rando manages to piss off a dragon by stealing a cup from its hoard. And hey, guess what? Beowulf has another monster to fight. For background, the dragon had been chilling for the past god knows how long in a barrel full of gold. The barrel was a burial mound for a troop of warriors from some ancient and noble race, and it had been filled to bursting with fancy treasure. The dragon lived there undisturbed until some tricksy hobbit snuck in and stole his favorite teacup or something. The dragon objects to this rather strenuously, and decides to hunt down the thief the old-fashioned way, by burning everything in sight on the principle that he's gotta hit the criminal eventually. And hey, if this is reminding you of anything... Yeah, that isn't a coincidence. Tolkien was a fan of the classics, but the dragon pisses off the wrong Yeet when he torches Beowulf's house, so Beowulf does his thing and decides to challenge the dragon to single combat. So Beowulf and his 12 backup dancers go track down the dragon, bringing with them both the thief and the stolen shiny thing. Now, you might think that using weapons to kill a 100-foot fire-breathing hellspawn could be considered poor sportsmanship, but Beowulf acknowledges that trying to barehanded wrestle a goddamn dragon might not end well for him. So he brings that fancy sword Higelac gave him. It's called Nailing, it's an heirloom, and it's shiny as hell. But that doesn't matter for very long since it snaps in half 3 seconds into the fight. God, they go through swords like coffee filters around here. So the majority of Beowulf's posse bails and skedaddles into the woods, all except for one, a bloke named Beowulf, one of Beowulf's kinsmen, who couldn't stand idly by and watch Beowulf be mildly inconvenienced by a tidal wave of hellfire. So Beowulf rushes to Beowulf's aid just in time for the dragon to get in a lucky hit and bite Beowulf clean through the neck. Now, you might think this would be a problem for Beowulf. Only if you haven't been paying any attention, of course. Nah, Beowulf uses this opportunity to go for his dagger, while Beowulf manages to find a soft spot in the dragon's armor and gets in a hit. Whereupon Beowulf
yeah, that definitely smog.
finishes the job with his trusty knife. So now the battle is over, you'd think Beowulf would start succumbing to that gaping neck wound of his, right? Nah, he's too cool to succumb to massive blood loss. On the other hand, deadly dragon poison could certainly pose a problem. So Beowulf's actually dying, and he's like, Beowulf, come closer. I have one last request. Could you go drag the treasure out of the barrel so I can take one last look at the riches I just won? Yeah. So Beowulf zips into the barrel, comes back out with an armload of the shiniest of the treasure, and Beowulf is like, thanks, kid, have fun being the next king, and dies. So Beowulf, now King Beowulf, exiles the 11 dudes who ran away from the dragon, and the Yeats retrieve the rest of the dragon's treasure and hold Beowulf's funeral. Then they set up a kick-ass barrow for Beowulf, reburying the dragon's treasure in with him, where, according to the text, it remains to this day. Don't get your hopes up, though. Some dragon probably already called dibs.
Damn it. For another problem, the total number of people who went to the dragons there, 13 geeks and 1 thief. Not to mention the king among them ended up dead. So really the Hobbit is basically just Beowulf as told by the thief. Oh shit, yeah, they're right. Oh my god. Oh my god. I didn't realize that. Whoa! Yo, I never made that connection before. Oh my god. The Hobbit is literally just Beowulf, but from a different perspective. Because if you look at the Thorin Oakenshield's history that we know of from the, I believe it's only really in the appendices that it's told, he's pretty much Beowulf. Except he's just not as immune as Beowulf. But he does fall under a dragon's sickness, much like Beowulf. But yeah, that was, wow. I love Overly Sarcastic Productions. I don't know what else to add here at the end, except for that Beowulf's just a fucking classic, man. So yeah, I hope you guys enjoyed. Remember to hit that like button and subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Thank you.